Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the PT on Ice Daily Show, brought to you by the Institute of Clinical Excellence. Happy Wednesday. Welcome to today's segment of Jerry on Ice. I'm Alex Germano, a TA within the Modern Management of the Older Adult Division in both the online and live settings, and that's with lead faculty Dustin Jones and Christina Previtt. Modern Management of the Older Adult Essential Foundation starts online October 13th. I believe it's over halfway sold out already, so it's on its way to being sold out. So if you want to join us for that cohort, please sign up. You can catch Dustin and myself in Montana on October 9th and 10th. And then a bunch of us are headed to Ohio in the beginning of November. So there's a few more chances to catch us live before the end of the year. Okay, so today's topic is going to be visual dependency in the older adult. Have you ever noticed yourself in a session with an older adult saying, lift up your head, look up, don't look at the ground, right? Like a parrot, over and over again while you're walking with somebody. Maybe you say it once, or like me, you probably said it 900 times in a session. And I admit it, like I used to be that person saying it over and over again. But if you realize you're saying the same cue over and over again, what you're noticing is that obviously that cue is not working for that person. It's not really sticking. That person's probably just defaulting back to looking at the floor within 10 steps. So it's been my clinical mission to eliminate the words lift your head up from my vocabulary. It's kind of like saying lift your arm up to somebody who has 2 out of 5 shoulder flexion strength. That sounds ridiculous, right? Like you would never ask that person just to lift their arm up. It wouldn't make sense. The same thing goes here. Something is limiting them from being able to successfully perform what you're asking them to do. So again, saying lifting up your arm 25 times is quite maddening to the person because there's a lot more limiting the person than just the desire to lift up their arm. It's not that they don't want to. It's not that older adults who look at the floor when they walk don't want to walk with their head up. Most of them are pretty aware that it's making them look quote unquote older to look at the floor while they're walking. So I feel the same way about this head up cue. There's an underlying reason why they're doing this and we need to address it. Basically, it comes down to an increase in visual dependency. As people age, there is a normal age-related decline across sensory systems, including vision, proprioception, and vestibular. There may also be an abnormal reweighting of the system to prefer visual inputs over vestibular ones. And this is not ideal. Our eyes are just not made to work alone in this manner and provide all the information that we need for our balance. Eyes can be a bit unreliable at times. Think about when you're sitting in traffic. This is like my favorite example of this. When you're sitting in traffic and all of a sudden you see the car moving next to you and all of a sudden you think your car is moving, like you've somehow let your foot off the brake or like your car is like magically in reverse. Like you get that weird sensation like, oh my God, I'm moving. And you go to like slam on the brake realizing that actually you're not moving at all, right? Your foot was on the brake the whole time. Somebody else was moving. We were able in that instance to check in with our vestibular system and realize we're not moving. This is why we're not created to only use our eyes to give us perception about our reality, okay? Not just our eyes. We also know that people who are at more risk of, or at a higher risk of falling are typically more visually dependent. So we definitely want this on our radar. They're typically unable to process information that's further than what they see right at their feet. Usually if folks are presented with an obstacle, they're looking straight down at their feet and that obstacle instead of ahead and anticipating other obstacles. Notice the next time, I think it's really important for us to notice how we interact with an environment if we don't have any vestibular or visual issues, right? When I walk in an environment, I can look in the distance. I kind of see some things that might interrupt my walking. Maybe I see a small branch or some, unevenness in the sidewalk or a curb coming up, but I can just create a mental map of that. I don't need to look straight down at my feet. I kind of know and can anticipate the obstacles coming my way, and I can adjust my walking technique as necessary. Older adults who are highly visually dependent aren't really able to look beyond their feet and assess their environment appropriately. if we're going to say someone is visually dependent, we need to measure it, right? I can't just say that because they walk with their head down that that's visual dependency. That's not the only indication of that condition. I need to show that they prefer visual inputs over vestibular ones. And we can do that in a few ways. We can measure someone's subjective visual vertical using a pretty low-tech solution called the bucket test. I am not going over it here today, but you can Google it. They're on YouTube. Has great examples of like a cheap bucket that you can test if someone's subjective visual vertical is off. Usually people who have this kind of deficit in their subjective visual vertical will be people who will present with visual dependency. And those older adults who are at higher risk of falling will also have higher levels of tilt in the subjective visual vertical testing, especially within dynamic conditions. We can also use a modified CAT-SIB or the regular CAT-SIB if you have a conflict dome on hand. And with the visually dependent older adult, you're going to see difficulty in conditions without vision. I love that test because we can really tease out vestibular, proprioceptive, and visual and see where the person's deficits are. So they might struggle with feet flat on a flat surface with eyes closed, or they may really, what I'm going to probably anticipate is some big struggles with on the foam, eyes closed, because that's when you're just truly reliant on the vestibular system. Now we can also ask about complex visual environments where, and just kind of like leaning on their subjective report a little bit too. People who are visually dependent may find really a lot of difficulty in their steadiness and their balance in places like grocery stores, crowds, driving in the car because of the high visual complexity. A nice example of this my patient was talking to me about the other day was he was standing on a dock, and it was a dock that was mounted into the ground, so it wasn't like floating on the water. It was just totally static. He was standing on it, but he was looking at the moving water, and he felt like he was moving because of that sensation and that water movement. So that's somebody who's, again, relying on visual information to tell him about his balance. He's weighting the visual information more heavily. So these are things we just want to look out for. There is a questionnaire, the situational vertigo questionnaire, that does cover some visual complexity scenarios, but in the research with people with visual dependency, they might not necessarily test positive on that test because a lot of the time, it's not that they're reporting vertigo or dizziness or rotary spinning. They're maybe more unsteady, or they're just like presenting with physical symptoms like the head down at the floor. You can also test optokinetics, which I think we'll need, I need to jump on a clinical Tuesday to talk about because I love them. But you can YouTube optokinetic videos and see if your patient is reactive to these scenarios or feels dizzy or unsteady by, again, a complex visual scene. Now, you all came to learn probably about what to do because I told you we're done with the cue of lift your head up. So you guys want to know what to do with people who are highly visually dependent, right? And the first priority needs to be in reweighting the vestibular system. I would not anticipate a one-session change with somebody that all of a sudden they're going to lift their head up. No, this is going to be a lot of work, right? Remember that patient with the weak arm, your priority is going to be to strengthen it first. So we need to do the same thing here. We need to fight the vestibular deconditioning that's on board, improve their vestibular fitness, and reweighting is basically just going to take away the overuse system, so in this case vision, and increase the reliance on both vestibular and proprioceptive inputs. So this patient, every session I'm prioritizing a lot of eyes closed work. Eyes closed on the foam and off the foam because I'm okay with that proprioceptive system helping us. If it's appropriate, I'm going to get their shoes off and try to engage with that sensory system a bit. I want them to get a lot of exposure with head turns, okay? I want them to be moving their head around in our sessions. And I was going to get them from my car and show you all, but what we can do is progress from eyes closed exercises, and maybe if we feel comfortable with them getting their vision back, and seeing if they become that, if they are still super visually reliant, but again, we don't want them looking straight down. We can use something like dribble goggles. I don't know if your father ever tortured you as a child with dribble goggles, but you can buy them on Amazon. And they're basically just little goggles with the bottom half of the vision occluded. Okay, I think they're used to teach kids how to dribble and not look down at the ball. But they can work really well for patients who will do anything to look at the floor. So just think about maybe purchasing those, and again, taking somebody from the no vision situation to the dribble goggles as you try to give them their vision back, right? Because they're going to need their vision to live their life. We're not going to live in eyes closed. All right, so now when we're walking, I'm not asking them to lift their head up. And what I commonly used to do as a mistake that I was making was I would have them lift their head up and look at a target. Just dead on look at a target. Now, that's like a very common reaction to fix the problem, right? Like, it's great. Like, their head is up. They did exactly what you wanted. They're now staring at this object, 30 feet away. But that's furthering the visual dependency, except now that their head's up, right? You're making them visually dependent of like staring at the tree or staring at the stop sign. And if you realize like how somebody without these deficits interacts with the environment, you will realize that we turn our head often. We really don't just stare at one thing while we walk, right? I'm looking outside at my trees as my example. We don't just stare at one thing. That's not normal, okay? So we're trying to go for normal here. So I want them engaging in the environment. I need them turning their head, looking ahead at their walking path, anticipating obstacles up ahead. So what I do with somebody who's walking with me, and I'm really working on engaging their vestibular system, I'm going to ask them, the OTs in the room might love this, a lot of visual scanning, right? I'm going to ask them to look around and find objects in their environment. For example, I might ask them, can you find an object for every color of the rainbow? So we're going to go straight Roy G. Biv style. We're going to look for different objects of that color, flowers, things in your house, etc. Or I can have them find 5 red things surrounding them. And this is a task that you can assign for a home exercise program, right? Like if you're out for a walk, I want you to go through the rainbow colors, finding all of these different objects in order to get that extra practice with their vestibular system. What's really nice about having the patient scan their environment is that these are pre-programmed head movements. The person's anticipating the head movement. They know, okay, I'm going to look to the right. And that's a little bit more gentler and easier to manage their balance with than random head movements. So again, I can progress this from them looking in their environment to me calling out, what color are those flowers? What color is that trash bin over there? And making the movements more random. I also like to talk to people about scanning for their obstacles in the environment. I want them to be able to look 10 and 20 feet ahead of themselves and tell me if there's anything that they need to worry about up there. If not, we can keep our head up and keep walking. If there is something to worry about, then what we talk about is how to anticipate that movement. How far does that seem? What are you going to have to do when you get to that stick that's on the ground? Will we go around it or will we go over it? So we're just kind of reteaching strategies that feel very natural to us, but make sure you're teaching people how to navigate their environment. Okay, lastly, consider visual backgrounds where you have these patients. If the person is very triggered by complex visual environments, you might want to start exercises like gaze adaptation or other eyes open activities in front of more neutral backgrounds. A person who is highly visually dependent may find that complex backgrounds are just very difficult to balance around. So when they drop their head down to the floor, they're seeing a more predictable and easy to understand environment. Think of visual complexity as a loading variable, okay? You can increase the intensity of an exercise as the visual and complexity increases, okay? So think about it as a loading principle for the vestibular system. Things like complicated patterns, watching those optokinetic videos, big open spaces, crowds of people, etc., might start to increase that difficulty. Static patterns like a brick wall or I'm trying to think of like big outdoor open space might be a little easier to process first versus like a dynamic or fluid background where people or things are moving behind them. So think about how you're going to load their visual system. Treating this is very difficult, and I'm not saying that these solutions are perfect and if you just do this, they're going to get a lot better. They're going to return to like very normal walking. Remember, there are age-related changes here that we can't entirely fix, but I want to make sure that they're back engaging with their vestibular system. That's the most important part. So There's also some other things that I probably didn't mention that would also improve their gait, right? Like working on a ton of strengthening, improving single leg stance, working on gait mechanics, all those things play a role. But again, I just don't want you to forget about the vestibular system because it is so overlooked and so important. That's the reason why they're drawn to the floor with their eyes. They've abnormally reweighted their system. I'm going to link an article on the Facebook feed that talks about all things visual dependency and aging. Please engage with this video if you have questions, if you have much better treatment ideas than I do. I would love to know them, just so we can all collectively try to fight this problem and to eliminate the lift your head up cues from our vocabulary. We can do better than that, okay? I hope you all have the happiest Wednesday. Bye.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the PT on Ice Daily Show. If you enjoyed this content, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. And be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram at the Institute of Clinical Excellence. If you're interested in getting plugged into more ICE content on a weekly basis while earning CEUs from home, check out our virtual ICE online mentorship program at ptonice.com. While you're there, sign up for our Hump Day Hustling newsletter for a free email every Wednesday morning with our top 5 research articles and social media posts that we think are worth reading. Head over to ptonice.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up.